Welcome everyone to this gathering on the inner development and sustainability. We want to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of this land, Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging, the Gadigal people of the Wuurrk Nation. It is upon their ancestral lands that this university, the Camperdown campus, is built. As we share knowledge here in this lecture and beyond, we may also pay respect to the knowledge embedded within the Aboriginal custodianship of country, as we understand sovereignty has never ceded. This is a virtual and in-person event, so we are trying a few things with the systems. So in advance, if something goes wrong, I hope you understand. I am now delighted to introduce you, Alana Marsh, a Meriam woman joining from Kulin Nation, Regenerative System, Resetting, and Wayapa, Wuurrk, sharing abundance, gratitude, joy, and vitality internationally as alalouie, living in a week of earth, mind, body, and spirit, activating and being nourished by reciprocity with country, paying respects to ancestral and contemporary Earth Stewards the world over. Alana will guide us now on Wayapa, an earth connection practice based on ancient indigenous wisdom. Wayapa is caring for the earth as the starting point for creating earth, mind, body, spirit well-being. Welcome, Alana. This is Wayapa, the creator.
Thanks, Vivianna. It's lovely to join you all, and I just invite you for a sec just to close your eyes and just think about that cycle of reciprocity that you engage with every moment that you're alive. So drawing in breath deep into your lungs from the trees and the oceans. And as you exhale, I want you to extend gratitude on the out breath. So it's a cycle of inhaling gratitude, inhaling nourishment, exhaling gratitude is what I meant to say. So I've been at work all day. I'm still in the building, so my brain is a little bit frazzled. Hopefully that's the only mistake that I'm going to make, but it's that beautiful cycle of reciprocity that we're going to lean into through the next couple of hours. And I wanted to share the first element, the movements that go for the first element of Wayapa. So it's a wellness modality, a species-centered wellness modality that elevates our connection to country. And we understand that that connection to country is the enabling platform for individual, but also collective mind, body, spirit, well-being. So if you're able to, I'm going to invite you to stand up and just focusing in on that breath again for a moment. And I just love that breath is something that we do every moment that we're alive or in some part of that cycle. So standing up with our feet shoulder width apart. And if you're not able to stand, you can still do these movements in your chair. And Jamie Thomas and Sarah Jones actually created Wayapa probably in about 2014. And Jamie is a Gunai Gunditj Mara man, so an Aboriginal man from here in Victoria. And Wayapa means connect, and Wuurrk means country. And like I said, it's that connection to country that is the enabling platform for mind, body, spirit, well-being. So it's a beautiful fusion of his lineage. And Sarah has been and continues to be an amazing partner for him to journey through life in a professional sense. So we're going to draw our hands up, just with that breath, inhaling in, and as you exhale out, extending that gratitude, maybe roots from the soles of your feet, connecting you down into the earth. I'm on the 25th floor, and this is the second time I've sent those beautiful tendrils down to the ground. So gentle and purposeful rhythm of breath. This time I want you to imagine that you can place your hands underneath your feet, and we're going to pull up goodness from the earth. And as that rises through your legs, you might feel a tingling as that energy from country radiates through the trunk, turning your hands up and out. And we'll just acknowledge everything that is above us. And we've seen some beautiful rainbows out the window here today in Melbourne. And everyone's so busy on their computers and didn't notice them. And it's just lovely. But I'm going to invite you now to draw down from above into your heart space things from the cosmos that nourish the essence of who you are. Then we'll take our hands out in front and we acknowledge all the vibrations that are happening around the surface of the planet, in the waters, heaps going on. But when we have that intimate connection with the sacredness of self, we know what will fortify and nourish that. So I invite you now to draw that in a second layer of goodness for your heart space. We'll then take our focus again down to the ground. You might like to bend your knees and we'll scoop up goodness once again into that chest cavity, that nest, that internal nest that enables the vibrancy and vitality of your day. We've taken our hands out wide. We'll acknowledge all that is around. But one of our sacred covenants is that we know most of the time we can control what we allow to have close. So we'll bring that in, nourishing that nest, that resources, informs, guides, and help us evaluate, the potency, what we've achieved with our day, or just, maybe watching cat videos as well. There's a place for everything in Aboriginal ways of knowing, being, and doing. So I invite you to have a little shake. Land yourself fully for what we're about to experience, and let's go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alana. Thank you for sharing that embodied knowledge with us, especially now after Wuurrk, and for Thomas, Daniel, and Fredrik, where they are waking up. So it's also really refreshing. So today we are together for this initiative to listen to the guests, but also to experience ourselves with practices and see what manifests from that in relation to today's gathering around inner development and sustainability. I'm now pleased to introduce Thomas. Thomas is a renowned teacher, author, and international facilitator who works with the complexity of systems and cultural change, integrating the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the discoveries of science. Since the early 2000s, he has staffed and facilitated programs with more than 100,000 people worldwide on the healing of collective trauma, with a special focus on the shared history of Israelis and Germans. Over the past 10 years, he has facilitated dialogue around racism, oppression, colonialism, and genocide. Thomas is an author of Healing Collective Trauma, Process of Integrating Our Intergenerational and Cultural Wounds, and the forthcoming book, Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World. Thomas leads an annual collective trauma summit and is the co-founder of the NGO, The Pocket Project, and he's currently a visiting scholar at the Wyss Institute at Harvard University. And today he's joining us from the Netherlands. I would also like to present Daniel, Director of Partnerships and Communications from the Global Leadership Team of the Inner Development Goals. He will engage with Thomas after Thomas' keynote. Daniel Hires is a social entrepreneur, ecosystem builder, and facilitator. Born in Asia, raised between Germany and the US, Daniel has been a prominent voice for sustainable impact and innovation since 2010. Today, his work is informed by the need of the human growth, the inner human growth, needed to achieve a regenerative transformation. Daniel, is responsible leader at the BMW Foundation and fellow at the RSA. He's joining us now from sunny Barcelona. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Vivianna, and to the University of Sydney, and warm welcome from my side to everybody. Yeah, I will summarize for like a little time my take on sustainability and why systemic traumatization and sustainability are inherently connected in my understanding, and then Daniel and I will have a conversation about how inner development goals and the inner development and the outer systemic change process are inherently connected. So as Vivianna already said, I was spending the last 20 plus years researching, working with, traveling around the world and looking at how trauma and systemic trauma affects our capacity to change and capacity to change systems, individual and collective systems, organizations, and so on. And I like what Alana brought at the beginning, because when we look at the principle of trauma and then we look at how that relates to our work on sustainability and leadership, or community leadership and change processes, when we say trauma is, just for a definition, is a process that happens in us in relation to strongly overwhelming experiences. So adversity, traumatic impacts in our lives as people, as individuals, but also as collectives, have a kind of a trauma response. And that trauma response is basically, we can see three sets of symptoms. One is that, and I think we all know that, when we get triggered by ourselves, we overreact in moments that actually are not calling for that reaction. The intensity of what comes up in us is too much. So we call this hyperactivation. There's too much stress. We either want to fight or we want to run away. And then when the overwhelm is too strong, then there is a shutdown in the system, and a part of the overwhelm gets fragmented. And I'm saying this because I think once we understand the basic principles, we can understand many symptoms that we see in our daily life, especially when we are thinking about systemic change. So that is like, let's imagine there is a split of data package in the nervous system or in the body that is kind of compartmentalized and shut down. So we become actually absent and numb. And between the two, there's a crack in the window. There's fragmentation. And when we look into our world today, we see that there is a tremendous amount of polarization. There's a tremendous amount of fragmentation in our societies. And the more the systemic stress is rising, for example, through climate change, that kind of fragmentation and split in our societies just gets stronger, because it's based on an unintegrated process. So what does it mean? Unintegrated processes means that we couldn't harvest the learning of a strongly overwhelming experience. So that's basically pending learning for an individual, but also for society. And since trauma is often connected to inappropriate human relationships, the learning that should have happened in our ethical line of development, in our ethical development, is pending. And it's frozen in the ice of the past that we never were able to integrate. Neither did we integrate often our own trauma biographically, nor could our ancestors, our parents, grandparents, and so on, integrate theirs. And some of it has been passed on to us. Nor did we often really take the time and have the state agency of integrating the legacy, the collective traumatizations of our cultures. So I believe there is a lot of learning that we never had, frozen in our past, and it lives between us. And I think one of the more dangerous aspects of what I'm saying right now is the gap between the scientific and technological development not matching the consciousness or ethical development that we are lacking. So we are actually struggling with leading edge developments like AI or genetic engineering or other scientific breakthroughs because we are missing a systemic ethical learning process. So that's one dimension. The other dimension is that when we look at trauma, trauma is frozen life, it's reduced movement. And I believe in many of the sustainable movements, in the calling for kind of a different response to climate change, we often push our development forward, which is great for breaking through habits and trying to create systems change through innovation. On that level, it's great. But the same pressure, when it meets trauma, is actually a counterproductive force and triggers a kind of a counterforce, a resistance to change. And I think all around the world, we also see a lot of resistance to the speed of change that we actually need. And the third part is a sustainable world is based on a sustainable inner architecture in billions of people that are able to be a citizen in a sustainable world. So when we call for a change in our society, we need to ask ourselves the question, am I able to be a citizen of that new society? And intellectually, we often say, of course we do, because we understand many things and we are very intelligent. But in fact, are we able to walk our talk? And I think that's where I understand Alana's introduction is because we can read many books about development and we can write many books about even about trauma, but we can still be very traumatized at the same time. And that gap seems to be normal. And I'm asking, why do we accept that we can think things that we can't live? There are many books about how to deal with our intimate relationships issues, how to develop more inner awareness and practices, but reading those books not necessarily develop those inner tools or capacities. And that's why I would say, we could say collective trauma is actually a process that is thousands of years old, that we all have been born into, and we normalized many of the symptoms. We say that's life. And I think we need to stop calling that life. We need to call some of it, that's life when it's hurt. Because once we know there is a wounding and certain reactions, certain conflicts, certain misunderstandings, certain inabilities to solve current burning issues, that's not life, that's life when it's hurt. And once we name it that way, we can also onboard it and take care of it. And I think we know more and more how to take care of it. We have some of the capacities and some of them we are finding out and learning. And so the next point, I think, I'm making it kind of short and concentrated that we can have also a dialogue with Daniel afterwards, because it's a complex topic, is trauma often seems like a stigma. It seems like something is dysfunctional, when in fact, the trauma response in us is a very intelligent evolutionary function. Trauma is a very intelligent process in us responding or reacting or dealing with an adverse situation. So what happens in us is actually intelligent, not a mistake. The side effects, if we don't take care of it, have detrimental sometimes or very severe side effects. And so we are suffering. But what actually happens in us is intelligent. So I believe we need much more trauma-informed systemic awareness, much more trauma-informed leadership, much more trauma-informed mediation, diplomacy, actually like a governmental representation of taking care of the legacies that we carry within our collective systems, because we understand how severe the side effects are. And we could say that whenever there is trauma in a system, it fragments our physical, emotional, and mental capacity. So what we say and what happens in us is not anymore congruent. And so that kind of distortion we could see like as a data flow issue. The inner communication system within our bodies, between us and societally, is distorted, is impaired. When that systemic data flow is not flowing well, then actually we have less access to the feedback mechanism where our body is naturally part of the biosphere, because biosphere doesn't happen around us. Every one of us is biosphere, as same as society. Society is not around us. Society is through us. But the separation that we sometimes experience, and why we developed schools of thought that actually created a separate notion of an individual from or within an ecosystem, I think is already part of the symptoms of collective trauma. So we accepted that that's kind of true. And I think in Western societies, we even overemphasize sometimes the individual. Even I believe in therapy that we often overemphasize the individual, and we take less in account that the individual is always interdependent and a part of collective systems. So we can't think individuals just as separate particles. We have to think individuals as interdependent wholes, wholesome systems that have a much wider range of data that flows through us. And I think sometimes the hyper-individualistic worldview actually stops the healing process in certain moments instead of supporting it. And so if I summarize this, given our time, trauma is an intelligent response and needs to be released from a stigmatized worldview, so that we actually work on reframing trauma in our societies as part of millions of years of intelligence in every human being. Because I actually believe the notion that the body, our bodies, is as old as it's written in our passports is actually not fully true. I mean, it's relatively true, but what's much more true is that our bodies are millions of years old. There is the whole development of millions of years of life is having this conversation right now. That's why we could also reframe a little bit the way how we look at history. We could say history is the past, but we could also say history is having this conversation right now when it's integrated. Integrated history is presence, but unintegrated history is the past. And unintegrated history is the past that creates non-emergent repetitive patterns. And I think that's very important for us, because when we look at society, we could say all what we see is happening now. And I would argue, no, what we see when we look at society are partly emergent, relational, innovative processes that have a capacity to update themselves. So to learn and grow and bring in future. But a part of the processes in our societies are actually repetitive processes that happen again and again. If you have the same conversation again and again, that's not the future. That's actually a repetition of the past. And that process has no future, in my understanding. Only when we create an environment that can onboard the unintegrated aspect of it, we actually grow now and we have a bigger future. So that's why I understand the inner sustainable the inner sustainable development goals as a beautiful summary of the parts of our capacities as human beings that we can develop, but I think we need to integrate the factor of trauma, because that's often where we struggle. Otherwise, presence, collaboration, relationships, and participation in our society are regular functions of a human being to participate in life and be creative. But we have this conversation only because that's often not happening. And so the inner fragmentation, the data flow issue, the integrated past, the unintegrated past, so that integrated history is the capacity to have this conversation. It happens through us right now. Unintegrated history is what shows up as the sand in the engine. And that's why we could say whenever individuals, and many of us carries a certain amount of trauma, every society carries a certain amount of trauma, given we live in a world that has been colonized. We live in a world that where many wars, genocides, and other atrocities happened. Dictatorships, a lot of power over hierarchies over hundreds and thousands of years. So we have a lot of trauma background in our societies. And we know that, I think the question to every one of us is, if we want to create a sustainable society, then I need to ask myself, do I live sustainably in my own experience in day-to-day life? Am I living in an accelerated stress level? Do I have a regulated life where the regeneration in my life can keep up with the energy output that I have, or how I interact with the world? So sustainability starts with us, and trauma is actually an excess stress that many of us carry inside, sometimes consciously and often also unconsciously. And that part is, in its per definition, not sustainable, because it's a loan of the future. And that's why I think creating a trauma-informed society on many levels, in businesses, in leadership, in diplomacy, in the way we, in our healthcare systems, is actually a way to begin to create systemic awareness. And that systemic awareness is the first step to integrate something that we all have been born into. And so I would love to maybe leave us with a few inspirations here and develop the rest together with Daniel in a conversation. I think that's more lively, and will connect what I said a little bit to the inner development goals. And then if there's time later, we can also open the space. If a few questions come in, I'm happy to respond to that. So Daniel, please join me. Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. Oh, that was really nice. I very much enjoyed listening to you. One of the things that I really took note of was, I think that for many people who, when they hear trauma, I think they only think of the negative side. And I think it's so good that you pointed out that at some point trauma was a good response, or it was actually, it made sense. And I think of Peter Senger's quote on that, where he talks about that yesterday's solutions are today's problems, and that, you know, a lot of the things that are causing problems today maybe at some point actually made sense, or made sense in a specific environment. And I also love the fact that you brought up that this is not just on the individual level, but we need to bring it up to the collective and the more systemic level. And I'm sure you've worked with so many people around the world on these issues. And I just wanted to ask if you could highlight maybe a few of the examples that you've seen around the world where people and structures have actually turned around and then done the trauma-informed work, and what kind of processes or what kind of results come out of that.
I have seen many different ways, from working in organizations or with kind of international leadership or consulting companies, where we develop trauma-informed leadership skills and how that impacts client interactions and inner organizational change processes, up to sitting in a room with big groups, because our groups are usually pretty big and large. So where we had very intimate conversations between either Holocaust survivors or the descendants of Holocaust survivors and descendants of German Nazi families, and there is a lot of trauma and potential conflict in the room, but with the right ingredients, it actually can turn within a few days into a tremendous healing process. So even in very seemingly polarized environments, if we do it skillfully and with the right pacing, I have seen tremendous processes happen, and actually tremendous healing and mutual creativity arise out of trauma. And I think that's also once we turn towards our legacies, we actually can free that legacy from its prison in space-time in the past, and that quality, that information actually becomes our contemporary creativity. We call this post-traumatic learning or post-traumatic also development. And so when we think about how much energy resources are actually frozen in our societies that are pushed away into the collective unconscious, there's a tremendous harvesting possible when we really turn towards it. And I think the feedback loops between our biology and the bios, which is part of the biosphere, and if the feedback loops in the living system are impaired or broken, then the response to systemic change is slowed down. And trauma has a disembodying capacity, which means if we don't unify thinking, feeling, and sensing or embodiment, then, which I think is sense making, which is also one of the inner development goal qualities. Sense making means holistic understanding, and I think that the amount of disembodiment I have seen in the work and how much stress is stored in us that we are not even aware of because it's so normal in our experience. And then it's normal in our systems. And then we call it stress at the workplace, or we call it stress in organizations, but actually it has much deeper roots than that. So I think I have seen many of them. I could go on for a long time, but I think there's a big variety of applications possible.
And I mean, when I was listening to you, it sounded that, you know, it's easy almost. Sometimes I think I look at it and I think we're in such a cycle of reproducing the trauma, living with the trauma, reproducing the trauma, that I think, if I speak for myself, I think it can be really difficult to break out of some of those patterns. And I'm just curious if you have, like, if there's maybe some people in the audience that are still like not exactly sure of, you know, where can they start? Where is something that, what's a maybe first thought pattern that they can adapt or try to think themselves through to kind of make themselves or start getting out of that cycle?
Yeah, you said it beautifully. You said we are in a cycle. And the first step is always to create the space. Even now, today, everybody who participates here today made space in their life to stop in a way and to reflect. We are just reflecting right now. So the capacity to reflect and create spaces, which often, because trauma comes with a quality that we call scarcity. There's not enough time, there's not enough protection, there's not enough resources, there's not enough something, access to X, Y, Z. And so once we are in that cycle, you said, it seems like I don't have the time, my schedule doesn't allow it, it's not possible in our organization, it's not possible in the healthcare field because there's too much stress and not enough resources. That's the basic principle of trauma. And certain parts of our society, like for example, the healthcare system, this is the firewall of a lot of trauma in the society. So that there we feel the effects, maybe even stronger, is very clear. Or when we look at different parts of our society, certain parts of our society simply carry much more trauma, and also often the scarcity that comes with it. And I think first becoming aware of it, and that we create relational spaces. We need an architecture in our society that is designed to do this kind of work. we need to implement something that doesn't exist yet. And that implementation is because we see the necessity in the societal framework. So how much more collective intelligence we can unfold if we take care of a certain fragmentation in our society. And we see it politically, we see it in many social phenomena, how that fragmentation and polarization plays out at the moment. And I think that's an attempt of democracies also to detox some of the trauma, because enough safety has been developed to do so, even if it sometimes doesn't look that way. But it's much safer to say something in a democratic system than in an autocratic system. So safety is another way. How do we create the right spaces where our nervous systems feel safe enough and related enough that the detox mechanism of the past can happen? And I think that's very important. That's another thing. And then we can say we have practices, relational practices, simply a simple relational practice that sometimes simple solutions seem too simple for our complex thinking. But I feel you while I talk to you, Daniel. I feel you and I feel how you feel me. I feel you feeling me is the basic building block of relating. Now, when we look into our societies, in our organizations, companies, whatever, I feel you feeling me is not necessarily part of our daily experience. Sometimes it is, and I think skilled leaders and skilled and organizations that are very innovative might have implemented it, but often we see pretty disrelated moments. And that disrelated moment has been normalized. It seems like that's how it is, that's how life is, deal with it. And I would say, no, I think we shouldn't say that's how life is. That's how life is when part of our relational capacity is hurt. And maybe, and I feel you feeling me is a practice that every one of us can apply. Steve Porges in the polyvagal theory discovered that one part of our parasympathetic nervous system, of our vagal nervous system, is what people call when my heart is open or when my heart is closed. So we all have actually a superpower to actually break that cycle, which means deeper listening, sensing each other when we talk to each other, being more present. And then many people say, but I don't have time for this. It takes too much of my energy. And that's exactly the symptom that we are caught in. So we have to practice individual practices, like developing more inner coherence, inner flow, inner awareness, as the Inner Development Goals so beautifully formulate. And we also have to develop different relational skills, even if at the beginning, sometimes it feels like I can't, or if I am stressed, it's very hard for me to listen to somebody that is also stressed. But that's I think, where the systemic practice starts. And of course, there are many other things that we need to implement structurally in order to create trauma-informed institutions. But that's just one example.
Thank you very much. Yeah. As I'm listening to you, I really, I'm thinking actually also of our own daughter who's 4 years old, and I'm thinking how I can perhaps help her not grow up with all of the same traumas, especially not only through the family. I think through the family, some of that will be reproduced, this intergenerational trauma, but I think our societies are not really prepared for what you're talking about, right? When we're thinking about how we educate our children, I mean, we have so very transactional models, right? Where the relational space is giving so little time and space. And so I'm wondering if you've done any work also with children or in education, and if you could speak to that a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're saying something important. I think when we look at education or parenting, we say the most important unit is the parent-child relationship and a healthy attachment process. That's why many people would say, oh, I didn't have a car accident and I wasn't a soldier in a war, so I'm not traumatized. But when we look deeper, as children, the attachment process is pretty refined, complex, but also vulnerable. And you said something very important. We see more and more, and we also work with some scientists that do epigenetic research. We see more and more how even within our cells, some remnants or after effects of trauma are obviously it's still debated, but there are the signs that we see the transmission epigenetically of trauma in generations, at least in animal experiments. And I would say I see this every day when I do my groups. For me, this seems very clear just by what I experience every day. And so when we look at, we carry some trauma in us as parents, our own awareness process, that we invest time and our own inner work to become more resonant and related is important. Then the lifestyle we choose as parents is important. So how much we are holding space for our kids, the quality of relationship and the quality how we provide certain qualities like protection, continuity of relation, recognizing needs, recognizing intelligence and potential, and then how we are with our children in the society that you mentioned. And if I live a more conscious life, then I also will find myself that I have to invest more. I have to be there more in order to be a regulating power in the education system that might not be informed enough. So, or I need to step in when certain things are too much. And so caring, so I extend my care around my child when I'm in society, in a healthy way, of course, not in an overprotective way. And so it comes with more responsibility, but I love the English word responsibility because it's the ability to respond. It's the ability to respond to life circumstances. And where I hit my own limitation inside, I can't respond. I become reactive. And so if I don't pathologize that, but if I see that we are all in the learning space here, because it's a systemic function. So we are all in a learning space, and that we allow ourselves to be in that learning space, but we are in the learning space. I think that's very important. And then we can create communities that can support us. We don't have to do this alone. I think the power of it in society is to do it together, to create spaces for it. And I think that's up to every family and every community to develop those spaces. We can do it.
And I like this idea of responsibility is the ability to respond rather than just kind of blindly react or have trauma inform our reflex and then react. And I think if we bring it back to sustainability, I think there is this like natural reaction in our society that we see of how we deal with sustainability right now, oftentimes framing it as purely a technological challenge or a kind of a technical challenge, right? We're putting up all these frameworks now on how can we, in very fine detail, measure carbon emissions from different industries and kind of look at it by the ton of CO2 that's emitted. But I think what you're saying, and I think what many people might also have a feeling about, that what's needed is something that is a bit more fundamental, right? It is about how do we integrate these past traumas into having a more healthy approach and answer. And I was wondering if you could speak to that as well a bit on how you have engaged kind of the trauma-informed work and linked it up to some of the kind of externally focused sustainability transformational work that's being done.
Yeah, I love the analogy of our body. So when my liver needs to clean something or my heart needs to pump blood, then I wouldn't say, yeah, the rest of my body is not needed for it. We won't say that. And for good reasons, because the whole body is a system that needs to work together. So humanity is a system. Saying it's technological solutions or it's scientific solutions or it's only inner solutions, all of it is too exclusive because it's all of it. And I think every one of us has different capacities and intelligences, and there's a whole system that is not just out there, that also happens in us. And I will say in a moment what I mean. Means that we can really work together globally, and nobody has the solution alone. The heart doesn't have the solution to keep the body alive. It has an important role to play, but without the rest of the body, it doesn't mean anything. So I think that we see how often we get into these silos, and we need sometimes these spaces to develop innovation and progress, but then also be related enough that all the solutions together are the solution. I think climate change forces us as a humanity to live up to the system that's needed now, which one is, I think, that competition as evolutionary fuel has been changed into collaboration. So we're literally using a different fuel that makes more sense at this stage of our world population and where our world is. And certain identity structures that made sense maybe over hundreds of years need to be deconstructed. They don't make sense anymore in the current world, given our technological progress. We became a global village and not anymore separate parts that live far apart of each other and hardly hear of each other. And that's why I think certain identity structures need to be sometimes also painfully deconstructed, and it needs a lot of inner change to participate in a changing world. The next aspect is volatility or uncertainty. We are going into a world that is uncertain, and it needs a lot of inner security and safety that I can feel safe in an uncertain world. Otherwise, I get very scared and I try to over control the outer world, or I disconnect from it and become kind of absent. And so I think when we see the holistic collaborative approach, then all of these things make sense. And then, of course, our inner software, like our inner architecture, is very important in the way how we apply all the other tools and how we are able to change ourselves. And sometimes change is very scary. So we need mechanisms not to kind of try to shut down that fear. And that's another point. Many people say, oh, without my fears, my life would be so much better. But hardly anybody says, without my liver, my life would be so much better. And so we try to externalize the emotions that we already split off because they seem like a disturbance, but we wouldn't do the same thing with our bodies, which means we need to learn how to actually integrate emotions into a unified fabric. Because I believe our emotions are the connective tissue of the world. But emotions have been very privatized, so it seems like it's my fear. But fear is actually an emotion of connection, or coming back to safety, coming back into supportive relationships. But that's not how we live it often. So fear became this thing that disturbs us versus, oh, we need to relearn how to actually collectively integrate our fears and turn the fear into curiosity. Like you see it most probably with your child, with your 4-year-old child. When he or she gets afraid, they come back to the parents. They want to feel safe, but when they feel safe, the parents are pretty boring. And then they want to explore the world. And I think, and then we sometimes see the interactions between, I think that's a beautiful example for leadership. Sometimes parents, when the child comes and says, Daddy, I'm scared. And then we say, oh yeah, don't be scared. There's no danger. But what does this intervention do? It actually devalues the emotion. It gives an intellectual answer to an emotional request, and it creates a distance. And the child stays with the stress and the fear. But if my daughter comes to me and says, Daddy, I'm scared. And I take a moment, I look at her, I feel her, and I invite her, I say, yes, I feel you're scared, come to me. And then there's co-regulation. There's an emotional answer to an emotional request. There's down-regulation. And then I say, okay, let's have a look what happened. Then I bring in rational leadership. That seems like just a small difference, but it makes a huge difference. If people in our organizations are stressed or there are difficulties, and we have just 5 minutes of co-regulation, togetherness, building a solution together, it's a very well invested time.
Thank you. And sorry, I just, like now that you were speaking about co-regulation, you almost regulated me a little bit because I just had to go and my partner just had a bird fly through the window. So Like I had to go and support very briefly.
See, that's a practical application. That's great.
So I'm co-regulating myself back into this conversation. But yeah, I think you really speak to something that's so important, that, you know, we're dealing with a whole system, and we need to cherish, I think, every part of it. And I think just even thinking of some parts of being unuseful or not like helpful in this, I think is sometimes one of the issues. And I you know, what brought me actually into the IDGs, there is this wonderful 5-minute film around the IDGs with many different quotes around this movement, but there's one quote that I really found spoke very much to the way that I also approach working on these issues, and that is that the way we are dealing, or the way we're trying to solve the problem, is actually the problem. And I hear that very loudly in what you say. I mean, as a parent, I think I know intellectually that, you know, I need to help my child co-regulate. And when she's coming to me, that to acknowledge the sadness is much more effective than, you know, to say like, there's no reason to be sad, or there's no reason to be afraid. However, the practice of it sometimes can be quite a challenge to always integrate that perspective into our minds. And I'm thinking of that also then back into the sustainability terms, that when we're thinking about how do we engage, how do we change, how do we transform, I think we also sometimes have this reflex of saying just, you know, take any industry, take your pick, the pharmaceutical, the fossil fuel industry, whatever. They're just bad, and I would just like them to stop. I would like them to go away, just like my fear. But I think what you're speaking to is that we actually need to find ways to co-regulate and to find a productive way forward with that. And I'm curious if you have like any experiences to share in that aspect, in that part of the work.
Yeah, I think let's have a short experiment. So, I mean, that's true for all of us. I will just play it now with you, Daniel. When I look at you, the Daniel that I see lives in my central nervous system. It's deep. You're deeply in here. You're not just out there. Your social agency, the information that you transmit into the world, happens in my central nervous system. And I want this because sometimes it looks like the world's just out there. But actually, whatever I see, whatever I feel, whatever I relate to, lives deeply in here too. And by being aware that there is a Daniel in Thomas, and by being aware that Daniel in Thomas has an intellectual dimension, has an emotional dimension, I'm resonating with your emotions, I'm resonant with your body, I feel your body while I speak to you. Often we become very intellectually hypnotized and we miss a lot of other information. And so there are actually many channels that all co-create relationships. So when I pay attention to Daniel in Thomas, I actually have a lot of information of you in me. But in daily life, we have been trained to look at the world's happening out there. But actually, a lot of the world happens in here. So that intimacy, I think, is a micro building block of relationships. Where I'm traumatized, I cannot receive you in me. So I naturally need to externalize you as an outer reason for my discomfort. And I think that mechanism, and that the same mechanism means that I see Daniel minus my trauma inability to see you, because my trauma creates a filter around you. When we meet people that trigger us, or when some people say it's a difficult person, or I supervise a lot of coaches and therapists and consultants. So when we say I had a difficult client interaction, the difficulty lives in the coach or the therapist, not out there. But that is a much higher challenge for us individuals to say, if I want to develop wisdom, I actually need to increase the amount of world, the part of the world or the world that lives in me, because that's the world I can be related to. And I think often we are fighting our demons outside before we actually looked at that inside, and we increase our social impact through relationships, not through externalizing difficulties. And I think if any difficulty is an interdependent system, then I think we all carry some responsibility. And I think that kind of inner developmental process that's needed to recognize that is very powerful as a change agent. And so I think the intimacy that we have with the world, also the biosphere, because when we go through nature, nature is not just around us. I'm also nature. And so my body is nature. So there's nothing different. And so that experience is often hurt. And where we are hurt, and sometimes we are very sure of what we see when we relate to people, versus that's how you appear in me, but I don't know what I don't see. So some humility in the human experience, I think, is very helpful, and the curiosity to find out together. And I think that's very powerful. Also for societal change processes, especially when it seems like here we have conflicting forces meeting, and how do forces that are conflicting on one level have a vertical development into a new level of development in humanity. I think that's very interesting.
Thomas, I'm looking at the time and I know that you have to go very soon, so I will close this very soon. But I think also just what you said again, that really speaks to me, that to realize that we are part of this. We're not just part of the system, but we are the system. I think it's the same idea with this kind of climate activist saying of we're not, it's not about kind of changing the system, but it is about like also changing ours and our relationship to the system. And I think sometimes it's so easy to then just say, you know, I want system change, and system change is something that is out there, you know, like it's so externalized. And what you say, I think, is exactly on point, that we oftentimes are just replacing a process that we should be first maybe doing with ourselves internally. And I would even say that that doesn't only go for people, but also with organizations internally. And instead of doing that more difficult work, sometimes we like to externalize it and kind of point fingers and show like what needs to change out there. And that's why I think this is such an important message to add to the sustainability conversation, that if we want this external change, we also really need to see from what internal place does it come from. And I saw in the chat actually also that Alice quoted Otto Scharmer on that the quality or the success of any intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. And that for me, I think, is one of the central insights for why we need, next to the SDGs, also the Inner Development Goals and what we're trying to do. So I don't know if there's any more questions from the audience. Vivianna, I see there's a very long question in the chat. And the question is, how can we make the interconnection between our inner world and the outer world more lucid? And the case for inner work to enable outer world outcomes clearer.
Yeah, that's. I will respond to this one question, and then I need to go because I'm running a big group here. I think that's exactly like what we discussed now. That my changing, like opening my inner space for more world to land in me consciously, so that I have a conscious experience of the process that I develop with certain parts of our world, our organizations, whatever, our family members, means that I change my quality of relationship to it. So I think that the relationship between my inner world and my outer world is like a data flow. The more I make sure that the internet connection is great. So today, the fact that we have a good internet connection makes it possible that we can relate over, I don't know how many thousands of miles, we can have this conversation. But had we had a worse internet connection, this would be either impossible or very annoying. And so that the data flow is actually very important. And I think looking at health as an intra-body and an interrelated data flow means that many channels of our experience, which includes our physical, emotional, mental capacity and more, is actually the basis of how I act in the world. And if we want to create more collaboration, the way we hold each other in our inner worlds is very important. So the relationship between inside and outside is hurt where we are hurt. And then it seems more difficult. But I think in our natural inner development, wherever we are integrated in our life, or wherever we are kind of in a mature human capacity, relationships doesn't mean only flowing relationships. Relationships, the capacity is actually, how can I be in relationships that hold contradictions, where conflict arises? The conflict is actually an important part of our relationships, but it needs a certain inner capacity to stay related to the conflict. And often we actually are disrelated in a conflict. That makes it stuck. And so I think the capacity to be in a complex world and stay related to it depends on how big is the cup. And I often say complexity is simplicity in the right cup. If I have that amount of water in my glass, that's great. But if I put a bathtub of water into this glass, I get overwhelmed. And I think the inner capacity, have a big enough cup for the world to land, is the prerequisite for the way how I participate in the world. I think the relationship is a very important part in how I act.
Wonderful. I agree. I think the way that we're relating and we show up into the world, there's really a lot of potential for us to move beyond kind of where we are today. Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you for spending an extra couple of minutes with us. I know you have to go. You have a big group waiting on you. In the name of everyone here at the event of the IDGs, I look forward to seeing you again at our summit. And thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Vivianna. You put a lot of energy into putting this together. So thank you very much. I hope it's helpful and it sparks some thinking. And I wish you all the best with the further conference. So thank you, and bye-bye.
Yeah, the Inner Development Goals really started out with some of these questions that we have been asking ourselves already today with Thomas. And because we recognize that we're not making progress fast enough on the SDGs. And when we think about why are we not making progress fast enough, we think that this is also related to some of the things that Thomas spoke about, that this external change that we're seeking is not complemented by an inner perspective. And that if we look at it, we need all elements of the body, so to speak, in order to really help us transform in a more sustainable way. And so we have this urgent need to understand the collective abilities. And I'm sure you all have heard of the SDGs, and I'm sure that everyone here is very much aware that the SDGs, these 17 boxes, that doesn't represent the real world, right? That is not like to say that the difficulty or the complexity of the sustainable transformation that we need are just these 17 very discrete, very neat, colorful boxes, and they're very easily separable. But of course, they're connected, they're related, there's interconnections, there's, all kinds of ways that sometimes it's difficult to say in which box does it fall. But what's great about the SDGs is that it gives us a language to speak about what are the different areas that we're active on. And I think when we see the success of the SDGs really coming out of this thing that the UNDP originally created for the development sector has now really reached many parts of society, where companies are now aligning their mission and their purpose to specific types of SDGs and say, like, we love SDG 1, 4, and 16. That really shows that there is a language now that is being used so that different people from different organizations, different sectors can communicate about what they're doing. And this was really also the question behind the IDGs. We wanted to find out if we believe that we need inner development and on an individual and a collective level, how would that need to look like? What are the areas that people are already working on in service to a more sustainable world? And what we went through a process with 4,000 people and did a one-question survey in the end, which is essentially this. What are the capabilities that you believe are essential to develop individually and collectively towards getting us closer to the Sustainable Development Goals? And through this process, we developed this IDG framework. So when you heard Thomas and I speaking about an IDG framework, this is the current framework made out of 23 individual IDGs and 5 dimensions. And the 5 dimensions, you can see they have a big logo here. They are being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And within each of those, there's a subset of skills that have really emerged from this process, as these are the 23 most relevant ones. One thing that I would just like to say as we're looking at this, the IDG project is currently in a phase where we say, we understand that there's a certain Western, European, American bias in this model itself. So we've been working, for example, with the government of Rwanda, and they asked us, so where's forgiveness in your model? And of course, when we look at Rwanda and how they went from genocide to a thriving nation that they are today, forgiveness was an important part in their journey. And that was something that perhaps we in Europe were a bit blind to while we're creating this. So right now we are doing a massive outreach to really get more than 2 million people to see our survey, so that we can get more than 100,000 responses from people with all kinds of different experiences that they can feed into this, so that we can update the framework and make it more globally relevant and also in a way more globally robust. And so this is really at the core of the work of what we do at the Inner Development Goals. This has kind of created a bit of a movement now around the world. We have more than 250 hubs that just kind of like grassroots sprung up around the world, where people got together and said, yes, this really speaks to something that I find missing in the sustainability debate. Oftentimes, these are people who, on the one hand, work on some sustainability aspect, and on the other hand, they have some kind of private practice, whether it's meditation or yoga or breath work, and they haven't really found a way to integrate those two things. And they always felt a bit schizophrenic, people tell me. And with the IDGs, they've really found this place that brings both aspects together and puts the inner development in service of also the external transformation that we want to see. And that's also the way that I understand, and where I'm really happy about seeing that people are also coming together even on the other side of the world, where it is almost the end of the day while our day over here is just starting. So I'm really happy to be here with you, happy to take a few more questions. I think there's one more thing that I just wanted to point out. Should you want to come to some physical event to actually meet the IDGs in person, we have a summit coming up in October. It's from October 11 to 12. There's even a third day where you can stay. So this is where we gather the whole global community together in Stockholm, and would be very happy to see people if they want to join. Of course, we will also do a digital event, and hopefully some of you can also attend that digitally. And then I just wanted to leave this slide up. This is actually the prototype for the survey that's going out that we want to spread to more than 2 million people. And you're very welcome to already take this survey and to give us feedback on how it is and how it works for you. But also really, it would be wonderful if you could help us think about how we can spread this into places that really have some wisdom to share with us about the inner development that's needed to actually do the sustainable transformation that we so dearly need.
Hi. I'm wondering how you're seeing the IDGs being mobilized around the world. So you mentioned that people are getting together in various hubs. I'm wondering what else that you might be seeing that is happening as a way of taking these in and actually doing something with them internally.
Yeah, very good question. So we're trying to reach out really on a variety of levels. On the one hand, we are engaging with governments because we believe, or at some level, we believe that if all that happens after all this like energy goes into the IDGs and we remain in a place where inner development kind of needs to take the slot between dinner and going to bed, then we won't really have achieved much because it's still kind of in the private space. It's almost as if we individually, personally are just responsible for that. We want to bring this out and we want to surface it into the different organizational structures that we have outside there. So that's our workplace, that's universities, schools. I think this needs to become a conversation that happens in organizations. We need to see how can we build structures in society that really support this kind of work and not make it the burden on the individual to somehow carve time out for that in an already busy day. And so that's why we're working together with governments, we're working with academic institutions, and also we're working with companies, because we see the need for this to come into being in a faster way. And we think that if we try to build a completely only grassroots initiative, it'll take 20 or 30 years until we can see any kind of materialization in the external world. So for us, we want to work through the existing structures, and those are oftentimes a lot of organizations and companies, and we want to work with companies through their employees as well as through the networks that they have to bring awareness to this, because we think that what is needed to deal with the various crises or the meta crisis right now is really the fact that in order to solve these complex issues, we need to also recognize that we are part of the problem and the system. And if we want change, we need to change as well. I see a question of how people can collaborate with the IDGs at a neighborhood community level. So I think the one thing that I would like to leave you with also is saying that the IDGs are an open source initiative. So we believe that in order for this to scale, it needs to be open, and people need to feel some kind of ownership that they can take over bringing the IDGs into whatever work they're already doing. And so please feel free to integrate the framework and to talk about the IDGs in your existing organizations. And I think if you want to start working on the different areas that we've mapped out with the IDGs, you can go to our toolkit, which you can find at idg.tools, where you can find a variety of different ways and practices and facilitation methods and exercises about how you can integrate some form of learning and growing and developing into some of the practices that you're already doing today. So perhaps you can find something interesting in the toolkit. The toolkit is at its start. It's going to grow, hopefully, a lot more. We also invite you to co-create, and if you have methods that you would like to share, to add that. But I think that would be a great place for people who are looking for a way to start to get started.
So I do a lot of leadership work with corporates. And how do we bring them in on the IDG? So if we're creating a network, how do we link that network rather than keeping them separate corporates doing? So I haven't really used the IDG language, but the work I do is exactly based on the IDG principles. How do we bring that together into a network so you start connecting the dots already and creating corporate community, for example?
Well, I guess there's two levels. I think if you're already working with corporates, I think the more awareness of what it really takes to bring out the external change that we're looking to see, and bringing in these dimensions from the Inner Development Goals, not only focused on kind of maybe increasing the work efficiency or dealing with some kind of lessening of symptoms of the current situation, that I think that is a great start in your work one-on-one with corporates. A way that we also are working with organizations is that we bring them together into a constructive community and dialogue. Because one question that I often get asked, is there kind of a handbook where a company between 1,000 and 2,000 people, and we've done a little bit of leadership development, but nothing really on like any other level. And we would like to somehow get started with when we're having a big company retreat next week. And so unfortunately, I have to tell people we don't have a handbook like that.
Yeah.
So
question more is
sorry?
from community development. So if we are trying to create a movement, and we're
Yes.
saying can't individually do it at grassroots. There are people like me who are dealing with corporates. How can we bring each corporate? So they're rolling this out within the corporate, but how can we bring them now together as groups of companies? So this roll takes momentum rather than one individual company here, another there, another there. Is there like a youth group? Is there like a community there L&D people can join, or the HR partners can join, and they come together? So like you have the conference in Stockholm, is there a community that they could be part of?
Yes.
So you get that momentum happening.
Absolutely. So we are keeping a community of IDG companies, and I'm happy to speak to you or also companies that are interested in joining that and sharing a little bit more detail. I think the key thing, and Thomas also mentioned it, is really to put them into relation so that they can start exchanging. And that's, I think, also what we're really trying to do with the IDGs, of creating the language for these connections and for people from different companies to then speak. So yes, we're working on that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I could just add one very tiny thing. So I realized that earlier I said that something like that I get reflected to is that people feel that they're torn between what they do professionally and working in sustainability, and that also what they do like privately in their practice, and that they feel torn. And I might have used also a medical phrase that is not accurate in describing that. So apologies for that. I was just trying to reflect on the language that's actually used when I hear it. And so this definitely was not to kind of like change the meaning of actually a condition called schizophrenia. So apologies for anyone who took notice on that. Thank you very much for the feedback, and thank you very much for being with us here. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and I hope you're all feeling as inspired as I am. I'd love to now introduce Alana Marsh, who's going to do another practice with us, and Alana will share a little bit more about the practice that she's going to take us through.
Thanks, Jax. I'm so delighted that my central nervous system has been entangled with Thomas and Daniel. So I just really want to acknowledge what we've just experienced now. I also want to acknowledge there's a couple of other Wayapa practitioners that are on the call. So Debbie over in the UK, Caroline in Sydney. There could be others. So I'm sending you lots of love from me. I also want to acknowledge Draco Horton, who's on the line. So she's part of the hosting team for the Regenerative Practitioner Resourcing. And we've just opened enrollments on Monday for another unfurling of regenerative practitioners into the beloved living community that we call Australia. And we'll send that link out to you later. And, you know, I really see you all as the beloved living community. And I did explain a little bit about Wayapa before, but, you know, I encourage you to go to the website if you would like to know more. And one of the things that I love about Wayapa is that it allows a really potent connection point. So it provides these boundary conditions for us to deepen our connection to country And in that process, you know, because we are nature, because we're part of the biosphere's hydrological feedback loops, if you want to look at the amount of water that is in our bodies, the embodied carbon that we take around with us wherever we go, you know, these are all things that we're borrowing for a relatively short amount of time when you look at the length of, you know, the biosphere's existence. And, you know, I just really loved so much of what I heard, and there were so many times when I felt, oh yes, and he's talking about morphic resonance and he's talking about this, and yeah, so hopefully there's been all these juicy light bulbs that have been going off, or activations in your heart space. So I'm going to share, I said earlier that Wayapa has 14 elements, and you know, we talked about the creator element and having that really strong sense of the essence of who we are, and then drawing in from around to nourish and resource that nest. Our last element is very close to that act of creation. So it's the child element. So we're going to do that child element now. So I'm going to invite you to stand up again if you're happy to do so. I can almost guarantee that you'll feel energized by doing this. So I encourage you to do that. But if you're unable to stand with me, that's fine. You can stay in your seat and do this. And you might even just visualize it if you don't want to do the arm actions. And remembering, you know, just to do these movements to your own capacity. And if you are standing, we have our feet shoulder width apart. And the element before the child element is the masculine and the feminine. We need those two things to combine to create that child element. So we're with the gatherer element, and she has just scooped up a little one that comes running to her. So you're going to scoop in something that you've had that has registered for you, and you're going to rock it from side to side. You might remember how that felt when you cradled your own children or your grandchildren. Or maybe you called in new life when you were looking to become a parent. Or it could be just something that you've heard from tonight that you want to draw a little bit closer to self. But we're going to embody the child. So they become too heavy far too soon. And we're going to become that child that's beside the edge of water. And you're going to look down at your reflection. So just moving your hands in a swirling action as you see the water. And we're going to use water as the metaphor, or I don't know, the metaphor for new horizons, new potentials. We're going to splash some of that water onto our face. So scooping that up, we see through this process that, you know, the people that we're with, the ones that we love, might be our friends, might be our family, but they've actually gone out ahead of us into the water. So we're going to wade out. And I want you to think about the many firsts that children navigate. And when you think about toddlers learning to walk, how many times they might have to sit down or fall down onto their bottom, or they might use the furniture to scoot around, you know, our lounge rooms. But sometimes as adults, we don't want to make mistakes, and we lock ourselves off from learning. And we have never gone out into the water where we can't touch. So there's a moment of fear, but there's also a moment of excitement, of joy, of curiosity, that childlike playfulness. And we see those people, our friends, our family out there splashing around, having a great time. So we're going to back ourselves, we bend our knees, and we reach out into the water, and we feel that move across our body. And we catch up with them, and we too can splash. But we're also going to take care of ourselves in this process, and we're using new muscles that we've never used before. So one last big movement out, feeling that expansion. I'm going to do a second one, feeling that expansion with those horizons that have changed. And we're going to now make our way back to the edge, and then to where we can touch, and we're going to walk out. We're at the edge. We can see our friends, they're also coming back in. So we just take this moment, taking our hands up to the top, down to the bottom. We're just going to reflect on what we've done. We've gone out where we can't touch, And we're going to be able to do it again whenever we want to now. We have confidence because we've navigated that first. Our friends have come back and we're going to reach down and we grab 2 handfuls of water and we throw that on them, feeling that childlike play, the importance of that for us from an evolutionary perspective. We're then going to grab 2 more handfuls of water and throw them straight above ourselves and feel that caress wash down over our body. We'll throw again. And just before we reach down for one more throw up, I want you to start or maybe continue the process of an intention, something that you would like to rain down upon you. And it may not be fully formed, but reaching down, scooping up that intention from country, throwing it up into the air, out to the universe, and then feeling that come back down. That is our child element, links back to the creator. But I'm going to hand back to everybody. And I really have had such a wonderful time. It's
I just want to spotlight Vivien, who is being Vivien is been doing a scribing, which is another way to account for knowledge. We're going to see in detail at the end to see how we reflect on it.
We're going to come back and do some journaling for 5 minutes. So I will just give you a quick overview of what that exercise is, and then we'll sit down and do 5 minutes of reflection. So if we think back to what Thomas was saying about transformation, beginning with that inner state, to reflect perhaps on the 5 elements of the Inner Development Goals. So just as a quick recap. So it starts with being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. Just to think about what the potential for those things, each of the 5, if there's one that particularly speaks to you, or all of the 5, in the way that they will come together for you individually, what the potential is for those, for you yourself, your organisation, or for Australia more generally. So think big. That's what we're here to do. So a couple of minutes just to reset, sit down, and then 5 minutes of journaling.
the in-person team are just about to go into some breakouts, and we're going to do the same here. Can everyone hear me okay? Double checking. Yeah, great.
Yes.
Okay, so in 1 second, you are going to disappear down the Zoom hole and appear in another room with some wonderful others from this group. So now's your opportunity to meet some others. So we've got about 20 to 25 minutes to just meet each other and to just share what's emerged for you so far. So you might want to share something from your journaling. You might want to share something that resonated with you from what Thomas said. But really, this is just your chance now to integrate, reflect, sense make, and build on everything you've heard. So we would love, again, there'll be an opportunity to share back a bit later. But yeah, we'd love for you the time getting to know each other now and what's brought you here. So you'll be in small groups, just 3. If you can't join, that's okay. Terry will move us all around to make sure that we're always paired with somebody. So Terry, if you...
We had an interesting discussion here. There was a point that I found very interesting. I'm very interested in the role of digital tools and how they will help with the learning and deepening of these qualities. But we also had a conversation about whether we can measure the IDGs in meaningful ways without in the process kind of, doing violence to them and killing them by being very clumsy with metrics. So how important are measurements? They obviously have political clout when you want to show impact, et cetera, et cetera. But how can we do them in smart ways? What's the role of technology in that? That's my blending of one of our conversations.
We were just getting to a kind of really juicy question that Chi asked. This is, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Chi, but this is a very different space from the space that she usually works in, working in sales. And so the question was how to integrate and bring the IDGs into the organization, which may be quite surprised, hesitant about them, and kind of help adoption within an organization. So that was Chi's question that we were just getting to at the end. And Tim Collins, I know that will be a good one for you as the people and culture person in Chi's organization. So I'll leave it there.
Hi, I'm Tanya, and I was really thrilled to be with Kulin, Alex, and Eva because we represented a whole range of ages of experiences, looking at, again, digital tools, Simon, and how that could be used to, and again, looking at scale. Who are the people that could be influencers in the case of coaches? We talked about mental health and how, there's been this directive, autocratic orientation. And then also it was really nice looking at little people and how are little people affected children. And also, then going, oh yeah, wait a minute, there's a little person inside of me too. And recognizing how things have changed, in our communities with the internet and the accessibility to one another. But how do we get the IDGs into, and what are the engaging and fun and interesting ways to do this? And how do we build networks, networks of communities, essentially, that care? And I've written OST, meaning Australia, but it's interesting because that also looks like trust. How do we build trust with one another when we have been indeed so hurt? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that leads also perfectly about how do we then translate what we have heard into different areas of work. And here I would like to introduce you someone that can help us to translate into higher education, since we're at the university, but also into policy. I would like to introduce now Dr. Fredrik Lindencrona. He is the head of research at the Inner Development Goals team. And Fredrik is a licensed psychologist from Sweden who has spent most of his career in research to policy interface, so translating research into policy. He was one of the initiators of the Inner Development Goals while leading the development long-term strategy for human capabilities and well-being in Stockholm. He worked between 2000 and 2009 at the Karolinska Institute, I hope I pronounce well, in National Institute for Psychosocial Medicine, where he earned his PhD focused on interagency collaboration to developing conditions for refugee settlement processes, building on human capabilities and well-being. Fredrik was part of the developing the Innovation Lab, supporting the comprehensive national, regional, and local strategy for mental health and well-being in Sweden in 2008. Through his career, he's been very active in global learning and collaboration between sectors and actors. And I am very happy to have him. I had the opportunity to meet him a few times already through the work that I've also been doing in IDGs. Welcome, Fredrik.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just amazing. I've been able to follow your conversations during the morning in our case in Stockholm, Sweden, but also later afternoon, evening for you in Australia and in that part of the beautiful globe. I have also had the privilege in many occasions to be in Australia and work with colleagues there as well as in New Zealand. So it feels like a second home in many ways. So this is just amazing to see how this is coming so well together between Vivianna and the whole team. I'll share a few reflections and then we'll get the conversation going, Vivianna, and you just interrupt me when you feel that there is something you want to ask or so. I'll try to share a few slides. Is that okay? Is that all right? I mean, Thomas and Daniel and others is very well articulated, where the condition we're in, and they're in good company, not the least with Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, that for sure, summarizing the last Sustainable Development Progress Report in 2022 was very clear on it uses words like rising higher and rescuing. And I think that's very, very important. You have been living through a lot in different dimensions of this, as I know, from afar in Australia. And then, of course, there's elements relating beautifully back to the connection to land that we so beautifully heard from Alana's work. And I really deeply honored by listening into that. Because, of course, there are some truth in how people have been living on the globe for many years and many thousands of years in several cases. So what can we learn there as well? But roughly, this is nothing new, but I wanted to sometimes I know going into the research role can sometimes be, trying to say the obvious, but I'm reiterating and restating this so we're just on the same page. I mean, for sure, we know that human agency, individual and collective, is critical, completely essential to drive any sustainable development together. It's not the only thing, but it's a very critical part. We also believe that being, acting, relating, collaborating, and acting, being, thinking would be, was focused on acting here, sorry for that. What we then call the IDG framework that Daniel so elegantly described is critical. And we feel that it articulates the inner abilities, qualities, and skills we need. But we also are very aware that we developed it within a very specific context. And we are now launching a broad study to reach as far as we possibly can to get much more input around what of these are felt as relevant for everyone and what are the things that might be specific to specific contexts. I've been spending some time on trying to understand what are we doing in terms of getting this to happen, and I heard that reflection a bit. I think there is now, if you're reviewing, I'll come back to some references if you want to, but in essence, we can, in some key fields related to sustainable development, make them even more successful if we're getting the inner dimensions of this progress right. And maybe we cannot even achieve them if we don't get these things right. So we have a field which is called Education for Sustainable Development, and that focuses a lot on individual change makers at different ages and a lifelong learning perspective on this very often. We have the research on sustainability leadership for organizations, and they can be public, private, civil, and so on. It's critical to how do we build and think differently when we are leading organizations given this elements. One is, of course, I guess, being able to be engaging in multi-stakeholder partnerships. And another one is also, because of course, public policy, public administration in different ways at local, regional, and national, international levels are also organizations. So they are able to execute and develop public policy, but they also have to function well as organizations in order to do meaningful things related to this. When we're thinking about mainstreaming, I think there are two particular implementation science concepts we can speak about. One is the willingness. How do you create willingness to get engaged? And how do you create ability to act on these things? So in the IDGs, and as you have already today in Australia, you have reached and conversed about both of these, I can imagine. How do we get more people who are probably not fully there yet, getting much more engaged in understanding the value of these things? And the other one is, once we know that and get the appetite, what do we do? We believe that what you are creating in your country, in probably parts of it as well, is we can call that ecosystems, where we're linking academia, business, policy, civil society, given the context of a specific country or region. And we feel that, and evidence would suggest that that's a very critical strategy. And two reasons, there are many more, but some of this, we do have in a modern society to create a whole lot better synergies between economy, society, democracy, and not the least, place. Because of course places are different, so what can be done and should be done in each place might vary. It's also a question of a circular flow of information, where we have to find a new way to think about how knowledge is created, applied, and then recreated upon what we learn. And then we are also very much critically dependent on each other in the global ecosystem, where we can create learning and practice across the globe. So, Vivianna, and yes, for those who are interested, maybe this is a good segue to talk about academics and higher education. This is just some of the references that we're building this argument on. So, Vivianna, you're working, and many of you, and you are physically in a university, if I'm getting it right today. How is your thoughts going when it comes to the role that you can, play, both play as higher education to further IDGs, but also reversely, what does IDG mean for higher education and how that can progress for the future? What do you think?
Yes, thank you. Maybe just very quickly. So I'm a lecturer here at Sydney University, and the course Peace of Mind and Peace in the World, and I'm also the IDG Higher Education lead. And when Fredrik told me to to take this lead, I was thinking, okay, we are talking with researchers and everybody's saying, how can we use the IDGs? So already in this sentence, I felt there was something there. How do we using something to do something? And my first answer was, well, we are not just going to use, but maybe how can the Inner Development Goals can change higher education, can change the way our systems, in this case higher education, but it applies to different sectors, how each sector can be changed, how each system can be refined and redefined in terms of their capabilities with using those 5 dimensions and with the work, maybe measuring as well, like Simon said, that they're trying to do, but not just measuring on the way that we know measuring, because we know measuring comes from a particular knowledge as well. So who owns knowledge? That comes the whole question as well. But also taking into account that knowledge, in a way, it's been, let's say, coming from one side only. So how can we integrate different knowledges in order to let's say, assess what we want to assess? And in that sense, the word, more than using, is perhaps within higher education is not just teaching, but also is research, is administration, is the executive, is interaction with communities, several players, several stakeholders. So how can the inner development goals interact with this in order to achieve the sustainable development goals, not just using it as an outer tool in order to achieve something? But I think we have heard today also from Thomas that our interior condition is elemental in a way for yeah. Is that answer, Fredrik?
Beautiful answer. And I think worth to be saying that's a new group that we've formed, and it also involves about 20 or so colleagues across the globe. So it's also very interesting to understand in which ways does this play out in different culture contexts or different categories of this very wide field core higher education. But I am 100% with you. I think as a researcher, often we have tried to, look at something out there, but we also have to recognize very much what we carry with us when we're viewing stuff. And how do we create ways to not create a distance too far between people and people who are doing research. I actually formally renamed my portfolio within the team, and was clear to say that what I think we should do, and I see as a completely central element, is the element of co-creation. So I was focusing on calling the whole team research co-creation, and that's both because of the our support to other sectors, but also within sectors in academia and between all the different ways we can co-create, because I think that's the main thing for us. So how do you think about that, Vivianna, and maybe others in the room? What's the way that the different sectors involved in IDG Australia could find ways to work even better together, whilst sort of inaugurated well today? What do you see, Vivianna?
Yes, I don't know which areas do we see here in the room or online, that how they think it could work. I think when also is recognizing that, I mean, it's not saying that to don't do both at the same time. Also now I need to work on my inner condition and forget about using. I think it's both parallel to go to make the sustainable changes. But yes, is anybody in the room would like to share how this could apply to policy or to business? We have someone in the room. Let me just
Thanks, Tanya. Again.
refocus.
I'm very curious about the way that this could actually be done at scale, because I think we really need to act very quickly, and I'm sure that Antonio Guterres would agree with that. And therefore, how do we create, and I think Climate Reality have done a good job of this. I'm observing that Climate Fresk as an organisation are doing good stuff, and that how do we become ambassadors, and how is there some kind of a certification process that require, make sure that people are clear about what the IDGs are and that they have a very simple process so that people can have a self-audit. It's almost like the wheel of life when you're doing a bit of life coaching. You know, how am I? A self-audit, the same way you do a stock take of stuff that we accumulate. And then how would we have a list of all the peak bodies within Australia? And how do we have a representative that goes, I'll take that. I'll go to the abattoirs. I'll do the accounting industry, you know, and then how do we do the same thing? And how do we collaborate with the likes of Renew organisation that are into sustainability? So, you know, we start really looking at influencers and change makers. Hope that helps.
Beautiful.
Okay, one more person here. Yeah. If you please say your name at the beginning, sorry.
David's my name. Sustainable development's got a lot to do with environment. And for a long time, we've had a missing link, and that's with all of us as we work in the environment. And for me, that means emotional well-being and measuring emotional well-being. So that's my input. I think the whole lot comes back to emotional well-being.
Can I say? Yeah. I just want to call out something that like I really see the value in this kind of looking inner rather than outer first in order to create the change that we want. But just I still don't really know what the inner development goals are. Like I know what they are on paper, but I'm not sure. Speaking as somebody who's just come in here for the first time, like I'd love to understand better what the goals are. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
To say, responding, what is the Inner Development Goals? I think one of the things we should say here is that the particular sort of unique position that we're taking, and happy to sort of have you join in here, Daniel, as well, is that when we formed it, we were coming from different kind of backgrounds. We were the sort of one group was coming from leadership development in different organizations. Others came from research. Some coming from policy development. Some came from communication, and that was the whole sort of thing that we thought that we can absolutely contribute with each distinctive thing, but the synergies happen when we're bringing those different things together. And that's obviously seemed to be true in also how it's been developing across the globe. We are working right now with looking at how can we support, facilitate, and develop these kinds of what you're trying to develop now in Australia. These kinds of ecosystems, I will call them. They have to be. The interesting tension here is that there is absolutely a both and thing, is that yes, we can develop, we're quite sure we can develop like a shared alphabet, or I like music, so I usually speak about it as the keys on a piano. And you know, it's good to know pretty much what an A is, or a C and a D, whatever. But that doesn't create music. It creates opportunity to create music. And that's why you have to go, you know, local as well in your the way of doing this, because that's where you can really meet continuously. But knowing that there exists other systems like that across, you know, the country or the region or the globe or so on is absolutely essential. What we also can do, and I think is coming back to several of your questions, is that by being, you know, a whole global community, we can also look at sectors. For example, we could look at what's the specificities of this within the built environment world, or the educational world, and so on. And that's interesting because that also, I'm, for example, heading up to New York and speaking at some conferences over the coming week, and that's going to be in distinct communities of different kinds of scholar and practice relationships. So I'll speak to many educators during the coming week, and many people in mental health services and mental health policy and well-being policy. So everyone should find their own way by this common shared material to get engaged together. So I think that's what we're trying to facilitate as much as we can. Daniel, you want to add something there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if I really boil it down to the one sentence, it is that we, as the Inner Development Goals, want to bring this power that lies in inner development to the complex challenges that our world is facing. And it's really this open. As an organization, we don't really want to limit, like that this is the only way forward, because I think we need to recognize that all parts are needed. I think that also what Thomas was saying. At the same time, I just would like to emphasize that sometimes I know that an appearance comes as if, okay, if I give you now a list of 5 dimensions, 23 skills, there is an impulse there that says like, oh, I need to, look at where are my weak and what do I need to improve? And one day I will be amazing at all the 23 skills. And that's really not, I think, the attention from where we're coming from. And I think I would almost take it back to Fredrik's analogy with thinking on the keys of the piano. I mean, when we listen to a beautiful piece of music, nobody will ever say, did the pianist play each and every single one of the keys during this piece? And only then do we think, is it a good piece?
Totally.
No, we want to have it really in the right context. And we just want to draw attention to that these could be all of the different keys that we could play, but that doesn't mean that everyone has to become, like a superhuman in a way, like for me, that just feeds that old narrative of the hero-preneur in a way that is, like just going to come and save us all. And I think the second aspect in there that sometimes gets kind of confused is that it's about only the individual and only the personal. So for us, our work is also about recognizing, of course, that people make up systems and organizations, but we want to bring this out into the organizational context and see where do organizations have strengths and weaknesses, perhaps even blind spots, and where do they see an opportunity to engage with some of these in order to be better in service of their mission.
Thank you. I just want to say one thing. Thanks, both. That I reckon that there's a bit of a difference on how people perceive the outer, the sort of sustainable development goals and the inner goals. Like that, it requires a shift in thinking, and I think you both just explained it really well. So thank you.
My name's Henrietta, and it's fantastic to be here. Thank you so much for hosting this. I'm really intrigued, Fredrik, about the connection between the Inner Development Goals and work that Professor Alex Linley did, who's co-founder of the Centre for Positive Psychology in the UK. And I use his tool as a strengths coach, and his tool is very much around strengths families, which are almost identical to the Inner Development Goals in a lot of ways. And beautifully, as the last lady put it, it provides the language that I think we've been lacking for a long time around what has been an intangible inner sense feeling, and providing that tangibility through a common language. So yeah, I'm just really curious about if there is indeed a connection between those two pieces of work.
What I really want to stress is, yes, as an example of what you're saying, is a beautiful input, and I'm also, as you might realize, deeply, connected to a lot of what's going on in the psychology field in different ways. But I and positive psychology, absolutely. There is a beautiful book with also English/Australian authors involved that you might have seen, called "Creating the World We Want to Live In," which is really where I would say that leading positive psychologists starts to look at what is outside of the individual much more. And it's working significantly on, so Felicia Huppert, that you probably some of you know in Australia, is one of the co-authors, looking at this frame onto, and they're talking about a clear mind and open heart, and an ability to work together to sort of solve problems. And they're looking at that framework to many different societal issues. And that's similar to how we're thinking in the IDGs, that it's like, using a better lens to see the human within the contexts of their different predicaments in some ways, but they can also be actively identified. So how do you lead complex systems? How do you decide as a politician? How does this things play into? Sometimes we had a very, very strict rational idea about humans, and I think that we have to update that view quite significantly, because it's not really working that way. It works in a very different way. But also, with that said, it's very important for us to say that we are not. The language allows for loads of pieces of music to be played, or stuff to be written. So I guess what's a very important part for us here is to say there's tremendous amounts of available research on each of these dimensions and all of the skills. So our role is also to be pointing and helping and signposting and supporting everyone to find other things through this shared language. It's not that we try to keep up as much as we can, but there's a myriad of relevant information out there. But they have never really been able to speak in the same language around these things. And that, I think, is probably one of our main contributions, to be able to, put everything into some kind of comprehensive overview. But there is a lot of depth and detail in all the things, as you saw in the conversations with Thomas and Daniel this morning.
Yes, and I think, Fredrik, you're saying something like really important, like for each place and at each time, it will be different, the skills that are needed in order to progress. It's not something that is stuck into time. Like today can be this skill and tomorrow can be another one, and also it depends the place. So that's why this will go for another one. If we're talking about all the pilots that the Inner Development Goals are doing right now in 6 different places. But I think what we're interested is, what are the skills that you think is needed right now? And maybe I will invite you to take your phones and just dial into answering this question out here in Menti. And I would like to invite, and why we are here, the people that made possible today, because there's no way that I would do it on my own. So
I have a very simple answer to that quite complicated question, which was, I felt called. It feels like a really exceptional opportunity to bring together a group of people just like this one. So it's very exciting to see everyone here today, and including all of you from all of the various places that you've come from around the world online, and all the wonderful folks who are facilitating online. I think this is, I think of the IDGs in the current form as a kind of lightning rod to bring together a lot of like-minded people. And I loved, Fredrik, your comment about co-creation. I feel like that's exactly what I've been invited into. So that's why I answered that call. Thanks to Vivianna to be the physical embodiment of that idea.
I'm Wendy Harper, and I've been hoping that someone was putting together something like the IDGs in the background for a long time. As you can see, I've got a lot more grey hair than most of the people here, and what I felt so grateful for in finding out about the IDGs was finally having data behind feelings. Finally having a whole lot of credibility, a whole lot of research to be able to take our conversations, which we all intuitively know is all part of human happiness and human systems that are working. And if we want more peace and sustainability, then we know that what's lacking is and what we need to build up is our cooperative and collaborative behaviours. It's been a difficult conversation to pitch into organisations, into systems. And so I'm just incredibly, I feel like, oh, that's a huge job I don't have to do now. And I've got all this support to be able to do more of the, to be part of making more of the change that I want to see happen in the world through how I'm being. And thank you to Vivianna for creating the space for all of us to come and We only met today, like first time we've ever hugged, right?
Yeah, and what a wonderful hug that was from everyone. Hi, my name's Jennifer, and I'll keep it short because I'll be echoing a lot of what's already been said. As a coach and a co-founder of a social enterprise and somebody that advocates for deeper work and what's below the surface and connection, the IDGs came along and I was like, thank God somebody is finally validating the fact that change starts with self. Simple as that.
I'm a bit closer.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, I'm Viv, and I work in the design sector, design education, and I see that it is so important to look at that inner work to fundamentally be really present. And I also think that a lot of businesses, organizations, startups and things like that, they fail because of interpersonal kind of issues. And coming back to this inner work is really about, your own presence and the way that you see the world and the way that you are in the world. So when you shift yourself, everything changes. So the way that you perceive the world and what you put out also shapes the world. So that's why I think changing yourself is the most important thing that you can do to create, that greater change in the world for a sustainable future.
I am Tanya Mottle. I'm a ambassador for the Global Eco-Village Network. And when I realized really what a problem we were having in the world in 2019, I went, gosh, I need to be part of the solution. And how can I do that? And like Wendy, I've got a few grey hairs. And I went, what can I do with all my skills? And I'm not clever like all of you. My PhD is in my life, which has been very varied. And I'm here because in 2019, Thomas Hübl, who works with Thomas Hübl, recognized that she developed the Global Eco-Village Network globally as a network of connected communities that are both traditional fishing villages and then intentional communities. And there's a process for doing that. And that includes a whole lot of things that are mapped to the Sustainable Development Goals, but instead of being sustainable goals, they're regenerative aims. And it's holistic. It's a whole systems process. And I loved it. And then I met Wendy and went, wow, that's a tool I'd like to use. And I had to go, what is it that I can do? What's my superpower? And one of the things that I do as a researcher is go, oh, who are these people that can talk to those people? And so that's why I'm here, to go, how can I be part of the solution and connect and work together and work with Polish people and, and all sorts of people from all around the world. And it's so exciting. And my comfort zone has gone way beyond my fear zone. And that comes up too. So challenge to all of us is go beyond our fear zone so that we can create the world that we really, really want it to be. Thank you.
And I just wanted to add one more thing, is that when we got together as a group, the whole intention behind this was to have this event, to invite everybody in to be part of this together. This is not something that we own. We wanted to have this event, and everybody got together, and all the people online who are presented today to give us the support to invite and create a community of good friends who would like to collaborate and share and contribute into the middle for this movement to happen in Australia.
Thank you. And I think also I want you to go with that question, why you are here. I think I saw empathy there, and I wanna show here the team online. My classroom is here from Peace of Mind. And we know the hybrid is a very difficult thing. So claps there with all the working. Why you are here in maybe one sentence?
I'm here because I think we need inner development for human flourishing on the planet. and we need to be differently, see differently, and act differently together. So that's why I'm here, and I'm really excited.
I'll just jump in there and share why I'm here. It's very much like a lot of things that have been spoken about a few minutes ago as well, overcoming fears, as well, learn. I jumped out of a technology space into the coaching and climate era domain late last year, having touched on inner development goals as part of the research I've been involved in coaching and in culture. And being involved in these sorts of events is a wonderful opportunity to learn as we're all learning, because everybody in the room, I think, I'm sorry, Fredrik and Daniel, but I'm guessing that you two are just like the rest of us, are learning just different points in the journey. And so it's great to be among a group that all want to learn like that. And obviously I'm hanging on the coattails of many of the people like Daniel and Fredrik along the way. So thank you. Thank you for everybody for coming and being part of it.
Thanks, Alan. I'll go quickly. But yeah, hey, everybody. So nice to see you all and to get such a wonderful turnout. I'm here because for the last kind of 10 or more years, I've been working in sustainability leadership and systemic design, strategic design, and constantly this work, this inner work, has been something that's on the edge and kind of on the edge of my practice, and so central to the work of collaborative design, of co-creation, of what we can achieve when we're fully present with what is and what our emotions are. And so that bringing the outside into ourselves and bringing the inside out into our workspaces is really why I'm here. And the fact that obviously we're not achieving the SDGs, so we tried everything else. Let's bring this beautiful work from the kind that has been traditionally in the space of kind of psychology and ancient wisdom. Let's bring that in and bring it into modern times. So I'm excited for what can happen. I think it's over to you, Cherry.
Hi everyone, lucky last. I'm also here because I work in the leadership development space in culture and transformation, and I've been in corporations for the last 20 years, and I found that sometimes you have to step out of, the corporate world to make some change, and I'm finding that I'm getting some traction in getting leaders to reflect and think about their impact on the world. And sometimes it's harder to do from the inside. So I know there's a lot of people from large organizations here tonight as well. So I think we're here to support you and how we can co-create and collaborate together. Back to you, Vivianna.
No, it's beautiful. It's fantastic to be, even if you're a whole globe apart, you really feel the spirit, and I really encourage that. And we're all on this learning journey. And what else? It wouldn't be fun if we weren't. That will be mine, because they will be very stale. So it's a continuous learning and exploration that we just should find the right ways. And you've started beautifully today, so it's happy to continue.
Yeah, I can only echo that. I don't know if I can summarize, but really from my very subjective point of view, I mean, I come from being an activist, a social entrepreneur, and when I looked around sometimes, I just saw that we are recreating sometimes the things that we're so trying to fight against. And then I was just saying that if we as social entrepreneurs are motivated by a different why, as in we want impact and not just income, it's not enough to just switch out the what, that we now say we're working on social entrepreneurship instead of regular traditional entrepreneurship, but it's really about the how and how we're building teams, how we're relating to each other. Because I think at the end, if all we're doing is burning out ourselves, burning out our teams, that just supports the status quo. So that's really how I got into the IDGs, and I'm really happy to see what's happening in Australia. I think it's a wonderful start, as you said, and I wish I could be there in person with you, and now like having a few informal chats. So I think now is also a really wonderful time for everyone who is there to connect a little bit further.
Thank you. And I think for me, I'm here because the one that called me more of the dimensions was being. For me, incorporates all of them. And I started my own inner journey a few years ago already. And I realized it's never ending. It's a process of evolution and growing. And the only way to go through is just putting myself out there. And that's why I can lead it. So thank you everybody for coming. And yes, and we will share the slides that came today with the beautiful cloud that you all created. And thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Daniel and Fredrik, for joining, and everybody.